Okay. He's got the look. I hate to even say this. Sir, I apologize, sir. I was actually over on the live lectern wondering where the hell you were. And so I forgot that DepSecDef Hicks is down visiting you today. I apologize. Let me not waste any time with your introduction. In all the years I've known him, I've never had any difficulty thinking what he's worried about. He's obviously worried about his soldiers. Please welcome General Mike Murray, Army Futures Command.
Jim, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, so great. And I assume Secretary Murphy's still there. And I did watch the last session, so I'm going to talk the entire 45 minutes so you can't ask any questions.
Yes, sir.
And I actually haven't seen that video you used in probably a year now. It's actually still pretty good. So I may just go right to questions. No, but seriously, about 10, 25 minutes or 20, 25 minutes, I think you asked for, and then I'll be happy to take questions for as long as we've got.
Yes, sir.
And I looked at the list of attendees. I didn't look at the entire list. I actually ran out of time before I could get through the list, so it's pretty impressive. And there are a lot of folks on here that have heard me talk before. But the one thing that I'll start off by saying is it's a reminder really of why AFC was set up, and it was in the video. And it's a reminder of, if you think about it, we have been what the Army calls fully operational capable for about 22 months. And 14 months of those have been under COVID conditions. And so I'm just incredibly impressed where the people here in Austin and really across the globe that belong to AFC have been able to take us in terms of our modernization efforts. The one thing people ask me all the time is, what have you achieved? And the list, I believe, is long. But the one thing that I always like to point out is I do think we've established a tremendous amount of momentum for the Army. And I do think that the momentum we've established to really drive the Army to become a persistently modernizing organization is just incredibly important as we move into the future. And you mentioned the DepSecDef. So we've actually had a pretty busy last 33 days here in Austin. So the DepSecDef most recently, the chairman visited. We had the entire JROC in Austin with us and the chief of staff of the Army, and all that was in the last 33 days. And actually, DepSecDef Hicks was here yesterday. And I know you probably read every paper in the country, but a recent quote in this morning's news was really, really good. And it quoted Honorable Hicks as saying that the Defense Secretary has been very clear that modernization is key. As Deputy Secretary, my job is to help bring new strategies to execution. And that line goes right through process development and capabilities for us, and eventually resourcing. And that's what Army Futures Command is all about to the Army, end quote. And that's really, I take that as a huge compliment, number one. And I would never say she's wrong, but in this case, she's absolutely right that is exactly what Army Futures Command is all about. We often get hung up on the technologies and the modernization solutions that we're working and delivering with our Asl Partners, but it's also about concepts. It's about the technology that goes into how we will have to fight differently in the future. It's about the types of units we'll need into the future. And ultimately, and finally, it's about that piece of material that we will have been chartered to deliver into the hands of our soldiers in a much quicker way than we have done in the past. Those visits were pretty important to us. And what I'd like to spend a couple minutes is just kind of explain to everybody, what I hope they took away from those visits. And I guess virtually give everybody a virtual tour with us because they all saw pretty much the same things. And I think what I wanted them to take away, that if you look at your Army, and I don't think people would say this in the past, but really your Army is leading in innovation concepts and technology. That Project Convergence, and we can talk about Project Convergence in the question and answer, is showing all of us that the next fight will absolutely be across and in all 5 warfighting domains. It shows us, and what I wanted to take away is that your United States Army will have a critical role in deterrence through crisis and into conflict. And that's true regardless of where that next conflict takes place. And finally, and this should come as no surprise, that the Army's readiness gains over the last 3 or 4 years and our modernization gains over the last 3 years, those efforts require consistent budget support and really adequate support to survive in the future. And I'd be remiss because I'm proud of the effort if I didn't remind everybody that over the past 3 years, the Army has, within its own resources, realigned over $30 billion to fund our highest priorities, our most important capabilities, and our readiness. And I don't see that changing in the coming years. And so over the last 3 years, the Army has made some really tough choices. And that's what it's going to come down to. If resources decline like everybody's anticipating, it will be about hard choices. And I do think that your Army has shown the willingness and really the willpower to make those hard choices. So, we showed all of those visitors a place we call the Army Applications Lab. And we stood up the Army Applications Lab to really reach out to the non-traditionals, the entrepreneurs, small businesses, to help us not only modernize, but to think differently about how we solve problems. And the key thing that we pointed out is Army Applications Lab is about starting with a problem. And in every case, we had some of our industry partners who have really forced us into thinking differently about some of the use of technologies and how we modernize differently. We showed them our software factory, which is brand new. 24 young soldiers, really incredibly talented soldiers that we found across the Army, that we have right now in a 6-month boot camp in terms of coding, and they'll be with us for the next 2.5 years here in Austin. And this comes from a realization of one of the things we learned at Project Convergence. We are going to have coders at the edge with us, and that's going to be absolutely essential during any future warfight. And we have to have that capability internal to the Army. Like I said, 24 young soldiers from across the Army. 11 of them were on their way out of the Army before they were given this opportunity. And that's going to, the other thing we talked to them about was really how we manage and utilize that talent going into the future. We talked to them about what we stood up at Aberdeen Proving Ground. We call it a Joint Systems Integration Lab, to where really we are bringing across the Joint Force technologies together to prove that they will network and work together. And I heard an earlier brief this morning where we talked about JADC2, and it's really all about the Joint Forces coming together in a lab before we get to Yuma and Project Convergence to really inform the JADC2 effort. And I do think there's huge value in the services coming together, solving joint use cases, not to take over the work, but to inform the work that Joint Staff J6 is doing, and the JROC is doing, and the chairman ultimately and the secretary are doing, to form that JADC2 concept. We're turning our concept, it was in the video, multi-domain operations, into doctrine with the help of Jim Rainey up at CAC and Paul Funk at TRADOC. And so that is in the process of being translated into doctrine, and simultaneously we are updating what is the multi-domain operations concept. It was published in 2018, and just like everything else in the world, a lot has changed in the last couple of years. So we're in the process of updating that concept, making sure that we keep it in line with that transition to doctrine that CAC is working on, the Combined Arms Center. And simultaneously, we are beginning to explore in our future studies program what comes next. So what does the operational environment look like, and what adjustments do we need to make when we get out into the 2035 to 2040 timeframe? And that's Futures and Concept Center, led by Lieutenant General Scott McKean, has taken the lead on that. Now, I just sat up at Carlisle last week with technical experts, concept writers, scientists, engineers, futurists, as we begin to talk through what that future could look like. We really talked to them about a concept I'm excited about we call Ignite, and that's the intersection of technology and concepts, and those two things feeding off each other. How do technology inform the concepts emerging technology inform the concepts that we're developing? And how do I get my concept writers to begin to think about if only I could, and then turn to a scientist, engineer, somebody that's knowledgeable of upcoming technology and emerging technology, and say you can't today, but in 10 years you will be able to. Soldier-centered design, which is always a highlight for any visitor, getting our soldiers involved early in the process of material design and keeping them involved throughout the process. And then talent management. The emerging technologies are going to drive us to value different types of talent in a different way. And so how do we find that talent within our formation? Because we have it, How do we get it trained to a baseline standard? And then importantly, how do we utilize it and then retain that talent as we move into the future? And then finally, before questions, I talk a lot about AFC, but AFC and modernization in particular is a team sport, and we've got some great partners. And I do think, we talk about modernization across the enterprise, and enterprise is bigger than the bigger than the Army. And some of those partners, we would not be successful by any stretch of the imagination without them. And, you've heard of the 31 plus 4. So in today's math, 31 plus 4 equals 35. And those are our signature efforts. 22 of those will deliver capability into the hands of our soldiers within the next 4 years. And that's a lot of hard work by some great PEOs, PMs, cross-functional team directors. And importantly, it's a lot of great work by our industry partners to be accepting of the Army trying to do things differently to accelerate the delivery of capability. And we could not do what we do without our defense industry partners. It's partnership with Congress. We have, over the last few years, been incredibly transparent with Congress. And it's not just things that are working well. It's also about things that aren't working quite as intended. With our budgets, with our efforts, always inviting them to our soldier touch points. And I do think that, through our acquisition partners, we are making good use and responsible use of the authorities that Congress has given us over the last couple of years to really accelerate that delivery of capability. Another key partnership, because we absolutely could not deliver capability without them, is our Asl Partners and at this cross-functional team level, our PMs and PEOs. Like I said, credit them wholly for a creative and responsible use of new acquisition authorities. Credit to them for working with us to clearly align our science and technology investments against not only near term, but more and more towards future term technologies that we have to develop and transition into programs of record. Credit with in helping us to incorporate soldiers into that soldier design process because they have to be accepting of then listening to what the soldiers have to say and making some of the changes they're recommending. Credit helping us reach out to small business. And I mentioned the experience we had over at the Army Applications Lab. Closely partnered with the PM for self-propelled howitzers, because if we're ever going to transition these technologies across the so-called valley of death, I've got to have a PM or PEO that's willing to take that technology and incorporate it into their program, or else it never gets into a program. And really, hats off to first Bruce Jetty and then Doug Bush most recently as the co-chair for the equipping peg for the Army to really help us align our priorities within that equipping peg against the Army's priorities. And it's just been an incredible partnership over the last 3 years. And then, of course, partnership with key allies and partners. I've got a couple L&Os here in the headquarters for Project Convergence 22. We will include partners and allies in and not just come to observe, but to actually participate in Project Convergence 22. And that partnership is incredibly important to us. And I do think that the ability and the willingness to learn together only strengthens what will certainly be us fighting together at some point in the future. And then lastly, the remaining question is, where do we go from here? And I do think resources that have yet to be announced and in some cases determined will really influence that. But if I had to sum up the way that the Army is heading in the future, I'd say no change, that our priorities will remain our priorities, that we will continue to focus on the 31 plus 4, that people are always going to be the number one priority for the Army. Readiness will be important. And then, as the chief says, and I know you're hearing from him tomorrow, is we have to seize this opportunity to modernize. We've been given the opportunity over the last 2 to 3 years to really get a great start towards a transformational modernization, and we can't afford to give up on that opportunity we've been given. So with that, Jim, I just thank you again this year for the opportunity to participate, and looking forward to the questions.
Wouldn't be the McAleese conference without you, sir. You ready, sir?
Yep. So, hey, Mike, it's great to be with you. I know we were together about 2 weeks ago on Project Convergence with your counterpart, the Chief of Staff of the British Army. So it's great to be with you again. I will not ask about Justin Fields, the former Ohio State quarterback, and if you're now a Chicago Bears fan, since we don't have time, and there's about a dozen folks that want to ask questions. But, I know you've read the book. We've talked about The Kill Chain by Chris Brose, who, as you know, was the SAS director. In this book, he talks about the false sense of invincibility in America after 9/11. And he says, the emerging tech has disrupted major global industries, including transportation, entertainment, and in his opinion, but defense has largely been unaffected. Defense companies like Blockbuster or Barnes & Noble have basically been shut down because they have not changed, and they have a simple basically choice: to change or to become obsolete. So it was a shot saying that we need to be obsolete. Now, that was before Army Futures Command. Walk us through, I know with DepSecDef being there yesterday, Kat Dix talking great and saying about how modernization is going to continue to be a priority. Walk us through the changes that you've seen that is being implemented right now and in the future in our Army.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, too, Secretary Murray. This is getting to be a habit, and I know I do know somebody that is happy with the Bears draft pick because I've already heard from him. And there's a quote that we use in DepSecDef Hicks saw it yesterday, and it goes back to your Blockbuster comment. So and it's a very simple quote. CEO from Blockbuster a few years ago went back, said something along the lines of Netflix and Hulu aren't even on my radar screen. And then you can see where Blockbuster is today. I do think that with efforts like JADC2, and I applaud the Joint Staff, and I applaud the SDA, and I applaud everybody that's working on it, because I do think that the ability to it was described earlier as linking sensors to shooters. I think it's bigger than that. I think that's a piece of it, and that's really what we did Project Convergence 20. But I also think a part of it is what we are beginning to describe as decision dominance. And, the ability to sense first, to understand first, to decide first, to act first, and then really reassess gives you what we're describing as this decision dominance. And I do think, as I think about a future battlefield, that the ability to do all that more rapidly than an opponent, and not perfectly, but better than an opponent, will be a significant, if not decisive, advantage on a future battlefield. And it's the tools, right? So it's the technologies, and importantly, you start thinking about things like artificial intelligence, autonomy, robotics, in some cases, quantum, in terms of quantum sensing, recent breakthroughs in quantum computing. I was just up at Aberdeen, like I said last week. They showed me some synthetic biology going on in some of our labs. Those technologies are here today, but they're not at scale, and they haven't been really applied in a military application at scale. So I think we recognize the disruptive nature of some of the technologies we're talking about. I think that we recognize that, really across the joint force, and I can never say that enough. It has to be a joint effort, that if we don't fundamentally think about or change our thinking about how we will fight together in the future and take advantage of some of these tools, I think we'd stand a chance of being the Blockbuster of the future.
Yeah. Again, I know we have a dozen questions. Jim, I'm going to go right to them if that's
yes,
right
sir.
with you.
Go right ahead.
We got Reginald Brown. Reginald is with BAE Systems. Reginald Robinson and BAE Systems, as we know, are using robotic manufacturing, doing some really interesting things. But Reginald, going to you.
Here's one for General Nahum. Here's the one for Dr. Trenier.
Reginald Robinson, BAE Systems. You with us, Reggie? All right, I'm going to go to Keith Flau. Keith Flau from Bell. I thought for sure Keith would be on there talking about future vertical lift, going twice as fast.
General Murray's killing
Twice long.
by one.
Hey, Patrick, this is Reggie Robinson here. We're just having a little difficulty getting off mute, so
Okay, no,
thank you very much.
and I'm used to calling you Reggie, so that's probably threw you off. But go ahead, Reggie.
No worries. Hey, General Murray, as always, it's good to see you, sir. And before I get to my question, I just want to say thank you for all the stuff that you're doing at Futures Command, but also for your availability to industry. I think throughout your tenure, there's not been an event that you have not participated in, and you always seem to make time at an individual company level as well. So we really appreciate that. This is getting a little bit to what Patrick said earlier, but you talked about hard choices in your opening comments, the fact that the Army has had to do that in the past, and that you're prepared to do that in the future. I mean, the writing's on the wall for the budget. You know, we expect a flat budget environment, maybe even a decline in Army total obligation authority. And so it must put a lot of pressure on the 31+4 initiatives. Can you just share a little thought about like what positioning you're doing at Futures Command in preparation for a scenario like that, and where your priorities might be, or are you looking to move beyond programs or stretch programs out as a way to counter this declining budget environment?
Reggie, it's great to see you, and thanks for that compliment, because that's incredibly important to me, that not only me, but across the cross-functional teams and AFC team that we remain open and available to industry. So thanks for that. And then, you know, BAE has been a great partner throughout, and I appreciate all the work that's going into keeping things on track for us. So yeah, of course. I mean, we're looking at all kinds. I mean, I read everything everybody else reads, and so, you know, we would be foolish if we weren't working through various scenarios. You know, we're still working through what we would call POM 2327, so the FIDEP 2327. We've made some assumptions, some different scenarios we're working through, and we're looking across the board. You know, the foregone fact that the Army is going to be the bill payer, I think, is an assumption at this point. And maybe I'm being optimistic, and maybe I'm not, but I do think that's still an assumption that remains to be seen. So we're working through various scenarios, and you know, people say all the time that Army Futures Command, you know, you're right where the Army was in the early 80s, because multi-domain operations is being turned into doctrine, just like airland battle was being turned into doctrine in the early 80s. You've got the 31+4 in the early 80s. It was the Big Six, which was in reality a lot more than six, but that's, you know, it was the Big Six systems. You know, the difference, I think, was, for instance, something you're very familiar with, the Bradley fighting vehicle, started off as a prototype in 1967, and we delivered the first production-ready Bradley in 1983. So that's 16 years. The M1 Abrams tank started off as a prototype called the MBT-70, and when we delivered it, it was 82 or 83, I forget exactly which year we delivered the M1 tank. So from prototype to delivery, 12 years or 13 years maybe. And why was that? It was because resources were scarce in the 70s, until President Reagan came in and did the defense bump. One thing I remind people all the time is defense budgets always come down, and eventually defense budgets always go back up, and then they'll come down again. It's a very cyclic cycle if you look at it over history. So one of the options, and you mentioned it, is, you know, so how do we keep things alive until resources get better in the future? And they will get better in the future if, in fact, we take a significant hit in terms of resources. Right now, we're focused on delivering everything we said we were going to deliver on the timeline that we said we were going to deliver it on. And that's including those 22 efforts that will deliver capability to soldiers in the next 4 years. Because our analysis tells us, and we've got 2 to 3 years of analysis now of simulations, of wargaming, of models, of smart people really taking a look at this, to include our combatant commanders' demand, saying those are the important capabilities we need. And so we're going to stay committed to this until forced to do otherwise, I guess is the way I'd sum it up.
Mike, being on the congressional side, I know when I served under President Bush and then President Obama, and in Congress as appropriator, I left Congress and the Army budget was about $250 billion. I come back 4 years later, as the undersecretary, our budget was about 150 billion. It's been plussed up now to about 182 billion. So definitely, I see that cyclical nature, and we'll see, obviously, with the China fight, what that means for the Army compared to the other services. But let me go to Keith Flau, if that's okay. It's Keith, are you with us now from Bell Helicopters?
Yes, sir, I'm on. Hey, sir. Keith Flau from Bell. First of all, sincerely appreciate you taking the time to share your insights with us here. It's been very informative. And, sir, a lot of what we've been seeing out there is folks writing that perhaps the Army doesn't have the relevance in an Indo-Pacific type of fight. Just wondered if you could share your thoughts in terms of how the Army executes as part of the joint force in an Indo-Pacific type of environment.
Yeah, I mean, so, and I've been reading the same things, Keith, and thanks for the question. And I'm almost certain General McConville tomorrow will have some thoughts on this as well. So I'm going to try not to get in front of him. But I think it's, I think it's naive thinking to think that we won't be forced to fight across all 5 warfighting domains. And land is still a warfighting domain. I also think that it's, one of the Army's core strengths is building partner capacity. And so I think you got to look at the entire spectrum of conflict, and hopefully we never get to conflict, that deterrence works. And the Army has a critical role, no matter where you are in the world, in terms of deterrence and in response to crisis and de-escalation. I think, the partners that we have around the world and that we continue to build, to include in Indo-PACOM, give us access that we're going to need if we ever did get to crisis or conflict. So I think and then I also think it's naive to think that an Indo-PACOM fight would be contained to a very small piece of terrain in the world. I think it would become much wider than most people think that it would be. And there would be an absolute need for land forces. And I also think it's naive to think there are not other actors in the world that would try to take advantage of the situation if a conflict did occur in the Indo-PACOM AAR. So I think there are, I've just rattled off some, but I think there's lots of reasons to think that the Army has a role, just like the rest of the services have a role, no matter where the United States is called the task in the world.
Next, we're going to go, General, to Jen Judson from Defense News. Jen, you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, General. I wanted to ask you, you've been at this for about 3 years now, and this is obviously a new command, and you've had to do a lot of inventing along the way. So I wanted to ask, now that you're this far in, what do you not have right yet? And what are you doing to try to get things right? Where are some of the spots that you just feel like need to be strengthened or a little weak at this point in standing up the organization or as you progress? And then just a quick question on comments you had regarding Project Convergence 22. Could you let us know what countries or partners you may have locked in at this point for that exercise? And does that mean you need to expand beyond UMA at this point, or is Project Convergence going to be centralized to UMA again?
No, and Jen, good to see you. And you beat Sydney this time, so I'm proud of you. So last one first. So it's the UK and Australia are locked in for Project Convergence 22. And like I said, that's participation that they're going to bring. And really, that's where we are right now, because we're already building 22. And it's just like we're doing with the Joint Force in 21. It is a joint board of directors that are help us building. We call them joint use cases, but it's really the problems we're going to try to solve together in Project 21. And we're beginning to build the coalition, allied, plus joint use cases that we'll use in 22. So it is a fairly long planning process to figure out what problems we're going to try to solve, and then what technologies each of the joint partners and our allies, in this case the UK and the Australians, will bring to bear to help us solve those problems. So that's 22. It's a really good question, because everything is going swimmingly. I've had no issues whatsoever. But in all honesty, it's.
Oh, we just lost the general's mic.
At the critical moment. You're just about to tell us. Here's where the body's buried.
Hey, General Murray, if you can hear us, your mic went out.
Hold on. He's not muted.
We'll work to get him back here.
While we work on it,
He needs to be able to see you.
yep.
Can't, but it doesn't have his phone.
So, General, we can't hear you. Jen, you can hear us, though, right? Thumbs up from where you are.
Can you hear us, sir? There he is. We lost you. We can't hear you.
So, he can hear us, but we can't hear him. So maybe ask him to dial back in if that's okay.
Not here.
We're working on it. Jen, I think he asked the second part of your question, if I could be so bold to say that. And then why don't I remind our audience what the first part of your question was? I think it was more on the weaknesses. And I know he jokingly said everything's going swimmingly, but did you want to, for the audience, repeat maybe
still
what your
no.
question is?
He's muted. Ask him and see if he can unmute.
Can someone hold up something that says he's muted? Right. Can you hold that up so he can see it?
I think you want to go to his camera.
Maybe over here.
Right there.
It's
Closer
too
and
high,
lower.
low.
Yeah, let it autofocus.
Muted.
I think we can get him to obviously maybe get out and call back in. Hey, Reginald, do me a favor. I think you're still there. I see you in the backdrop there.
We're trying to work it.
We're trying to work the questions and until we get him the general call back in. Let me go to you if you
All right,
don't
so
mind.
he just signed off, and then he'll sign back in.
Yep.
Okay.
The speaker issues up his end.
Okay, we still have at least 10 minutes of time for him, so
Yeah. We'll go back and to kind of ask something with Reginald.
go right ahead. Yes, sir.
Hey, Reggie Robinson from BA Systems. Not to put you on the spot, but I know saw some of the stuff that we're doing on the modernization BA Systems doing and really moving to the timeline to the left in a positive way, manufacturing the vehicles, the combat vehicles that you're manufacturing for our warfighters. Can you describe some of the breakthroughs that we've had there and some of the things that have slipped to the left from the BA Systems perspective? His audio might be out too, unless we can go to him. He was the first questionnaire.
It's okay. We should have General Murray back within 30 seconds here. I see Reggie. He's on the screen.
He is muted, it says.
All right. So someone's muting. Is that Webex muting?
Jim, I'm on the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and we just
Yes,
had,
sir.
obviously, 14 of us commissioners, Senator Angus King on the SASC, as you know. and
Yes, sir.
Mike Gallagher, former Marine.
There he is. Oh, he's back.
I think we have General Murray back up. Only the host can unmute, so
It says only the host can unmute.
I'm going to let the technicians do this.
It
But
says McAleese Studio is co-host. A little sign just came up, said only the host can unmute.
Jen Johnson very hysterically said someone didn't want General Murray to answer his question. I don't know if that's incoming Secretary Wormuth or not, Jen. I'm not sure. That was very funny. And I know the chief comes on tomorrow with us. And I was going to joke though about this U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission.
Yes, sir.
The fact that we saw what just happened with dark side knocking out,
Right.
obviously, the pipeline, the Colonial Pipeline, which is about 45% of the oil we use in the Northeast. And, you know, it might be Russia and China not liking what General Murray have to say, and they may be knocking him offline. So until he comes back online.
At least he's making the best of it.
Yeah. So
His facial body language is much better than I expected from
I
him
was
right now.
curious,
Sir.
you know, I know he mentioned that he spoke. I didn't know if he was alluding that he spoke to Justin Fields himself or someone else that was happy about Justin Fields being the new quarterback for the Chicago Bears. By the way, his alma mater, Ohio State University, has a great ROTC program, but has done a phenomenal job, you know, really developing leaders of character there. I've worked
Right,
out
he's a
with those
big
cats.
Ohio Buckeye
Oh,
fan,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I've actually ran through the shoe, run out to the field with those cadets and those great warriors, and it was a great honor. Jen, do you have any other inappropriate questions that China and Russia might be upset about that you might want to ask? So knock off our program for 10
The
minutes.
conference was going fantastically until Jen Judson forced herself to the front of the queue.
All right, I think
Oh.
we're back on now.
Do we have something? Do we have something?
General Murray, can you hear us now? I think so. And can you speak and let's do it?
We have Jen Judson.
Hey,
He's-
Jen, I
he's
think
trying
we
to
can hear
speak.
you. Do you want to just, Jen, do you want to just maybe ask your question again so we're back on? You're muted again. Jen is muted again. Can we unmute Jen? She'll ask her question and we'll bring it to Mike Murray. Is that all right? Or do you want to go to the next question?
I'll defer to you, sir.
The gentleman that is in the room with General Murray, if you could configure the mic settings on the computer.
Well, so we don't get too behind schedule, I'm going to go to Scott Baum. Scott, can you have us? And I do like the fact that our colleagues of the 12 people in the queue are giving Jen a hard time for being a cyber threat. Please out there conduct proper cyber hygiene before getting us offline. But Scott Baum,
Hey.
why don't you, Scott, if you don't mind, ask your question, Scott, and then hopefully
There he
General
is.
Murray's
He's
there.
coming up at another place.
So again,
There
Scott.
he is. Can you hear us? He's still muted.
But in the meantime, Scott, can you ask your question and then we'll be ready to go if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking to General Murray, wherever you are in the cyber world at this point, hey, appreciate your opening comments. And you talked about what the Army is doing, and you noted the self-propelled howitzer as an area where you're planning a transition. It's important to bring that innovation. And my question is really to the other half of the indirect fire capability in the Army. What's the current thinking about the towed portion that supports SBCTs, and how are you thinking about driving innovation in that space?
General Murray, they're saying that you are able to unmute yourself now.
Are you there, sir?
You know, I feel like that young gentleman there in Austin, Texas, is going to be doing a lot of push-ups later today.
Yes, sir. Well, either all of us will be, sir.
At least he's smiling. Yes. So I have a great relationship with General Murray, for the record. So he knows that I have nothing to do with.
Yeah, but he's looking at me like a very large.
Jim, I would not want to be you. I'm not going to.
Very large, hungry wolf right now. He's going, that McAleese. What the hell did McAleese do to me? Or,
Hey, Scott. Scott Baum from Elbit. I appreciate your question. We're going to try and work on General Murray. We're going to keep doing the test there. Why don't you, Scott, if you don't mind me asking, why don't you tell us a little bit about Elbit? I know you asked the question while we fill some time here, if you don't mind.
do we have a phone number for a...
Hey, there we go. I just got unmuted. Appreciate it. Absolutely. So, from an Elbit America perspective in the middle tier, we're really trying to follow and understand, how the Army is thinking about bringing innovation at scale across the formation. And so there are major large programs, right, like ECRA or ERCA, but there are other parts of the formation where innovation is occurring. And so, the challenge of all senior leaders is how do you balance innovation across the force? And so at any point when General Murray comes back up, love to understand how, as a senior leader, he's thinking about that.
General Murray, you should be hot now. Your mic?
About now.
We're good to go, General. You're on.
We got you, sir. We got you.
There we go.
Please, someone mute Jen Judson, please. But go ahead, General Murray, you're on.
Technology is a challenge. Sorry. Sir, you sound very feminine. I caught some of that, and Jen, I apologize that you made me drop whatever happened up there, but I didn't touch a thing, I swear. So, part of this is hard choices, and I've kind of talked about it. And I heard the question about the wheeled howitzer, and there's just going to be, I can't say much more right now than we have made a bunch of hard choices, and we're going to have to make more hard choices. In many cases, it's almost to the point of being almost impossible choices to make. And so we're going to have to figure out how we balance, a lot of things going forward to make sure that, we focus on the most critical capabilities that our soldiers are going to require on a future battlefield. And in some cases, that future may not be in the far distant future. That may be here in the next 4 to 5 years when we start delivering capability. And then keep options open for when resources get better, which will almost certainly happen. So it's hard choices, keeping options open, and really not boxing ourselves in with some near-term decisions for what may change in the future.
Yeah. No doubt when we talk about the trifecta, where you say end strength, modernization, and readiness, and how they all have to pull from each other. Let me go to, if it's okay, Bruce Hawke now. Bruce Hawke from SAIC. Bruce.
It worked. Thank you. Hey, General Murray. Bruce Hawke, SAIC, a longtime friend, and really happy to see that you're at AFC after your great tour at G8. My question is a little bit backward thinking, but the last few days I've been sitting on calls with members of Congress who seem to be, I don't want to say arguing, but questioning the term legacy. A lot of them say it's old. A lot of them say it's effective. I was just wondering, I have a two-part question. I was just wondering what you think of as legacy. And then we've seen this before, that we're going to get rid of legacy platforms and jump right into new platforms. What's the Army thinking on modernizing or upgrading some of these legacy programs to fill that gap until you get enough of the modernization programs into the system?
Bruce, it's great to see you. And I remember our interactions when you were on the Hill and when I was the Army G8, and I think even at the beginning of my tour at Army Futures Command. So we've been asked officially our definition of legacy, all the services have, and that's going back across the Hill. And I always, when we get into these discussions, I always caution people that what you're talking about is risk. Right. So if you can guarantee me that the United States will not go to war in the next 10 to 15 years, I can afford to divest myself completely of legacy and focus on next generation or modern, whatever you want to call it. If you can't guarantee me that, and nobody can, you're going to have to balance that risk with what some people call legacy or old material. And so it's not an easy math problem to solve, and it's really the chiefs and the secretaries to solve. But my personal opinion is that you're going to have to maintain legacy material, what people call legacy material, that is still very capable for a period of time while you modernize. You can't just do one or the other. It's a combination of both to balance that risk going forward.
Thanks, Bruce, for your question. We appreciate it. I want to go to Sydney Friedberg from Breaking Defense. Sydney, you're up. What's your question?
Hi, Sidney Friedberg here from Breaking Defense. Hopefully audible. Not through any want of screaming and yelling did I get behind Jan, I assure you. But let me ask, you mentioned that you guys are revising the MDO concept or putting it in doctrine. What changes are we going to see, just to give us a preview from the 2018 version, especially changes based on the practical experience in the dirt at Yuma with Project Convergence, and also from the joint feedback as the joint all-domain concept, the joint warfighting concept take shape?
Yeah, so that's you hit the two key things there, Sydney. So it's when General Milley signed that out in December of 2018, nobody had thought of Project Convergence. Nobody had really thought about the JSIL. Nobody had really thought about some of the technologies we've seen. Nobody had really done much experimentation with some of the artificial intelligence. The AI task force, or soon to be AI center, up at Carnegie Mellon was not there. The software factory was not there. AL was in its infancy. So it's really just it's probably not going to be major changes to the overarching concepts in multi-domain operations, because I think they're still valid. And the thing we're going to have to do is be very careful that as we update it, we don't throw the entire transition to doctrine off unless there's something very, very glaring that says that we need to, because there's going to be a problem with our doctrine, which I don't think. So the tenets of calibrated force posture, multi-domain formations like the MDTF and convergence, those are not going to change. But it's really just based on what we've learned the last couple of years and what we've seen, how do we update that to bring it up to date? And we'll probably do it again, in a couple of years. And people ask me, so what's the next doctrine look like beyond MDO? And I don't know. We're going to have to do some experimentation. It may be another evolution of MDO. And I've told people jokingly, almost, that maybe our doctrine needs to be almost like a wiki page, because as technologies advance and change every 2 to 3 years, we're going to have to keep our doctrine up to date. And this is just the first attempt to do that, is to bring it up to date with everything we've learned.
That's great. Next, we're going to go on a speed round, Jim. Here we go. We have Dana Kyoki Jackson from MITRE. Dana Kyoki Jackson from MITRE. Okay, we're going to move forward. My battle buddy, I served with him in the Army, served with him on Capitol Hill, and then in the Pentagon, former Secretary Stephen Hedger. Secretary Hedger, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here. Great to see you, Patrick. Thanks, General Murray. Glad I'm getting in here. I think I'm over your time, so I'm going to throw you a softball, but I think it's a meaningful one, and not one we in industry ask enough. But I can tell you, we at American Rheinmetall have been trying, as much as we want to be a greater partner of the Army, we also want to tell your story. And we spend a lot of time in my background talking to folks from the Hill and others. So my question to you is, what can we do as you're in these budget fights, as you're in program fights, as we're in this constrained time? What can we in industry do to help you be a communicator of the Army's needs and more effective in where we're trying to go?
I think everything you just said, sir, you're already doing it. And we've appreciated the partnership, not only with you and your organizations you represent, but really across the defense industry, because we said right up front 3 years ago that we needed to form that partnership and take this journey together. And for my foxhole, it has been absolutely a journey we've taken together. We've asked industry to do some things differently. We've asked industry to take some risks with us and do some things that they normally wouldn't do. And in every case, the defense industry has been along with us. And that's across the board, the big five, the smalls, the foreign, the domestic, et cetera. The problem, and you understand this, the problem we've got is, and I talked about it earlier, is a majority of our things are in development. And so there's not a lot of jobs associated with something that's in development. There's not a firm district in terms of something that's in development. And so just reinforcing the point that, we're operating off Bruce Hawke's term legacy, but 40-year-old equipment in many cases that have been made better over time. But, the chief likes to say we modernize every 40 years. I would say we transform every 40 years. And we're in that transformational period right now between 80 and 2020 that we have got to take advantage of the journey that we have started, and we've got to see it to fruition. And so I think that the advocacy and the help, not only within industry, but on the Hill and other places, is very helpful, and we appreciate it.
Stephen, that was a very JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, but what could you do for your country question. So thank you, as always. All right, next we're going to go to John Cash from Draper. John, what's your question for General Murray?
Yeah, sir, a real honor to be on this discussion with you today. Appreciate your time. So I spent most of my career as an Army officer, and then here at Draper, focusing on a lot of soldier capabilities with the Soldier Center here in Natick, Mass. So one question I've got is just if you could describe really what you see as the most pressing issue at the squad platoon level or capability gap at the squad platoon level, how we're doing on addressing it, and what additional help do you need from folks such as Draper in the nonprofit world, academia, or just industry at large? Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a great question, John. I appreciate it. You know, we started this journey about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a few people, mainly Bob Scales, pointed out that, you know, if you look at our infantry squads, and it's bigger than infantry squads, but our soldiers that close with, and the whole mission is close with and destroy the enemy. It's a very, very small portion of the force. They suffer the vast majority of the casualties, and we invest very little money in their capabilities in the overall Army budget. And so that was the driving thought behind the Soldier Lethality Task Force. And we've kind of migrated that. You know, we treat Abrams tanks as a platform. We treat the Apache helicopter as a platform. Is begin to look at our close combat formations as platforms as opposed to individuals. We've been pretty successful and continue to try to drive weight down we're putting on our soldiers. We're delivering autonomy and robotics that in the future we will make contact with robots as opposed to humans to increase the situational awareness. We got the first new caliber and new weapon that's on track to be delivered in the next 2 years, in over 60 years. And since the last time we delivered a new caliber along with a new weapon to go along with it. We got programs that's been in the news lately, like enhanced night vision goggles, binocular, that increases situational awareness, provides protection because you don't get the green glow anymore that was able to be picked up by a cell phone in theater. IVAS is a piece of that, lighter weight protective materials. And then, you know, you mentioned Natick, in the labs and other places, really looking at how we enhance the performance for our soldiers. And it's not genome manipulation, but it's really the holistic health and fitness of our soldiers, and how can we enhance that as we move into the future. Natick is a huge part of that.
And General Murray, that goes to your 6 priorities very clearly in that 6 bucket where it's soldier lethality. So appreciate that comment. I think we're going to close it out with Matthew Bernard from Defense Daily. Matthew, what's your question, pal?
Great, thank you. And I'll try and get this in here quick, but what are your thoughts on the idea that, not having maybe publicly announced a plan for a future heavy lift aircraft might hamper something like proposed cuts or reductions to a program like the CH-47 Chinook? Obviously, don't want to get ahead of what might be included in this round of night court. But, how does that kind of go hand in hand about maybe hesitancy from lawmakers not having something public yet? Thanks.
Yeah, the last part of that, Matt, about the hesitancy of lawmakers. So, the CH-47 and there is no plan right now for a Cape Set 4 or 5. And the Army's been pretty consistent saying that we, and the Cape Set thing has confused people. But we've got the FARA, the Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, and the Future Long Range Assault Aircraft are the 2 plans and programs we have working right now. There is nothing working for a replacement for the CH-47. CH-47 is a critical capability. We started the CH-47, specifically the Block 2, years ago. The CH-47 Block 2 is actually being fielded to our special operators today. So we're absolutely committed to that, and we're absolutely committed to working with Congress and industry to make sure that we can deliver that capability. But the Chinook, that medium lift aircraft, will remain important to the Army for the foreseeable future.
And then on that note, sir, may I offer you a personal apology? I apologize for the technical chaos. And I can see you looking at me like a large wolf in the hen house. So I'll find a way to do right by you, sir. Thank you again.
Push it. Push it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I apologize. We had technical problems.
No, that's not an issue. You're just testing my agility.
That's fine.